Higgins, glumly making no movement in her direction, delighted. He backs against the piano and bows brusquely.
Miss Ainsford Hill, going to him with confident familiarity. How do you do?
Staring at her. I have seen you before somewhere. I haven't the ghost of a notion where, but I have heard your voice. Rarely. It doesn't matter. You'd better sit down.
I'm sorry to say that my celebrated son has no manners. You must not mind him.
Miss Ainsford Hill, gaily.
आप क्यों
I
पढ़ रहे
don't.
हो character name?
Sorry. तो हाँ एक्चुअली मैं अपने लिए पढ़ रही हूँ, क्योंकि मुझे मिस और मिसेज में थोड़ा सा कंफ्यूजन है.
हमें दिख रहा है ना तो आपको नहीं पढ़ो.
Okay.
He
Gaily.
doesn't.
I don't. She sits in the Elizabethan chair.
A little bewildered. Not at all. She sits on the ottoman between her daughter and Mrs. Higgins, who has turned her chair away from the writing table. Oh, have I been rude? I didn't mean to be. He goes to the central window through which, with his back to the company, he contemplates the river and the flowers in Battersea Park on the opposite bank as if they were a frozen dessert. The parlour maid returns, ushering in Pickering. Colonel Pickering, she withdraws. Anika play Pickering.
Okay. How do you do, Mrs. Higgins?
So glad you have come. Do you know Mrs. Ainsford Hill? Miss Ainsford Hill? Exchange of bows. The colonel brings the Chippendale chair and little forward between Mrs. Hill and Mrs. Higgins and sits down.
Has Henry told you what we have come for?
Oh, sort of we were interrupted, damn it.
Oh, Henry. Henry, really?
Half rising, are we in the way?
Rising and making her sit down again. No, no, you couldn't have come more fortunately. We want you to meet a friend of ours.
Higgins turning hopefully. Yes, by George, we want 2 or 3 people. You will do as well as anybody else. The parlour maid returns, ushering Freddie. Mr. Ainsford Hill. Higgins almost audibly, past endurance. God of heaven, another of them. Freddie shaking hands with Mrs. Higgins.
Dito.
Okay, I'll play it.
Huh.
You do, and this is how do you do, but with a manner that basically Higgins wants to point out. So जितने वो कम लोग चाहता है वहाँ हो उतने उसकी परेशानी बढ़ रही है. And he was very loud to tell Pickering that they are in a mess. They wanted to introduce somebody, but there are people here around. And then this is heard by Mrs. Ainsford, and she rises up. She says, "Are we in the way? हम फिर चले जाते हैं." And then Mrs. Higgins has to come in and tell them that no, no, that's not the problem. There couldn't have been any better occasion that you are here. And Higgins again makes a better use of the situation that, oh, this is even better that Eliza can be tested in front of more people than just his mother, right? Do you understand all this, or do I need to explain it?
No, ma'am, we understand.
Mrs. Higgins,
Very good of you to come. Introducing Colonel Pickering.
Freddie bowing, adieu.
I don't think you know my son, Professor Higgins.
Freddie going to Higgins, adieu. This is पढ़ाई कराई गई है सबसे ऐसे बोलने के लिए. So it's like before you see the flower girl behaving that way, that she will only talk about the weather, she will only ask people how do you do. So before her coming, it's like we already have. It's like GB Shaw is preparing his audience with somebody else having those manners, uh, mismatched manners. This is not elite society. This is not the behavior of the elite society. repeating how do you do, how do you do, how do you do, as if he has just learned this. Move on, Mrs. Higgins. No, it's Higgins. Looking at him much as if he were a pickpocket. Pickpocket. I'll take my oath I have met you before somewhere. Where was it? Freddie, I don't think so. Higgins resignedly. It don't matter anyhow. Sit down. He shakes Freddie's hand and almost slings him on the ottoman with his face to the windows, then comes round to the other side of it. Higgins, well, here we are anyhow. He sits down on the ottoman next to Mrs. Eynsford Hill on her left. And now, what the devil are we going to talk about until Eliza comes? The use what the devil are we going to talk about unless she comes? For the devil. So he
Henry,
repeats this devil, and even before he said something like that, and Mrs. Higgins couldn't stop him, and he said that in front of the guests that have arrived. I think he says this to Miss Science word. He makes use of the same word, devil, instead. Damn it is the word. We were interrupted, damn it, he says to Pickering. And Mrs. Higgins interrupts. Oh, Henry, really? Are you really using that language in front of my guests? Says, damn it. Damn it, and now devil. And this is something we are already been in advance prepared for by Mrs. Pierce. Okay, so where are we?
Mrs. Higgins.
Mrs. Higgins.
Hmm.
Henry, you are the life and soul of the Royal Society's soirees, but really, you rather trying you are rather trying on more commonplace occasions.
Am I? Very sorry, beaming suddenly. I suppose I am, uproariously. He laughs.
Who considers Higgins quite eligible matrimonially. I sympathize. I haven't any small talk. If people would only be frank and say what they really think.
Higgins relapsing into gloom. Lord forbid. But why?
Taking
Taking up her daughter's cue, where she says that people should be frank enough and they should do the small talk and not always maintain the air of belonging to some class. Mrs. Ainsford also takes cue from what her daughter has said, though Higgins says, Lord forbid that we should be talking about that small talk. And Mrs. Ainsford asks, but why? Higgins says, what they think they ought to think is bad enough, Lord knows. But what they really think would break up the whole show. Do you suppose it would be really agreeable if I were to come out now with what I really think? Now, what is he thinking about? Presenting Eliza to the guests.
Mm.
So he says what your daughter mentioned, that people should talk about what they think about and not be careful about the words they are using, not just say what they think, not be as plain as they are in commonplace occasions. But like Royal Society, you should be very careful in what you are talking about. You should weigh your words before you throw them out, weighing your words before you throw them out. And that's exactly what his mother meant, that you are life and soul of Royal Society, so it is, but really you're rather trying on more commonplace occasions. And after this, Miss Ironsford says, this is how people should be like, plain, direct. And Mrs. Ironsford says, yes, she also thinks like that. And Higgins says, if I were to do what I am thinking right now, Uh, do you suppose it would be really agreeable if I were to come out now with what I really think? Miss Seinfeld Hill gaily.
Is it so very cynical?
Means, do you mean to chuck us out of this room and you cannot say it to our face? Is that something cynical? Cynical? Who the Dickens said it was cynical? Dickens. This is just a. These days we have a word, a bad word, and when you twist it, the usage is what the fish. So that fish is what he is doing to the word, some bad words, to Dickens. Who the Dickens said it was cynical? I mean, it wouldn't be decent. So it's not cynical, but it wouldn't be decent to say what I want to say. Mrs. Eynsford. Oh, I'm sure you don't mean that, Higgins. Mr. Higgins. Higgins. You see, we are all savages, more or less. We are supposed to be civilized and cultured, to know all about poetry and philosophy and art and science and so on. But how many of us know even the meanings of these names? To Miss Hill. What do you know of poetry? To Mrs. Hill. What do you know of science? Indicating Freddie. What does he know of art or science or anything else? What the devil do you imagine I know of philosophy? Mrs. Higgins warningly.
Or of manners, Henry?
So he said, what do you think I know of philosophy? And his mother says, and even of manners. What do you know of manners? Because he made use of the word the devil again. Parliament, Miss Doolittle, she withdraws, Higgins. Rising hastily, running to Mrs. Higgins. Here she is, mother. He stands on tiptoe, makes sign over his mother's head to Eliza to indicate to her which lady is her hostess. So उसके सर के ऊपर करती है करता है ऐसे. She is the one. She is the mother. The rest are all guests. So she is the one you have been prepared for. Eliza, who is exquisitely dressed, produces an impression of such remarkable distinction and beauty as she enters that they all rise, quite flustered. So they believe that somebody from the ruling class has come. Then all of them rise. Just the change of the dress, just the way she walks into the room, has an air of having command over the people. She commands respect now without demanding it. Earlier, as a flower girl, she was demanding respect and she wasn't respected. Now she is commanding it with her dress and she hasn't yet spoken a word. Guided by Higgins's signals, she comes to Mrs. Higgins with studied grace, because that is what helps people take her as somebody from the aristocracy. Lisa, speaking with pedantic correctness of pronunciation and great beauty of tone. How do you do, Mrs. Higgins? She gasps slightly in making sure of the H in Higgins, but is quite successful. Mr. Higgins told me I might come.
Cordially. Quite right. I'm very glad indeed to see you.
How do you do, Miss Doolittle? Who was Pickering? Was anybody playing Pickering?
Miss.
Okay, play it.
Um, how do you do, Miss Doolittle?
Shaking hands with him. Colonel Pickering, is it not? Mrs. Ainsworth, I feel sure we have met before, Miss Doolittle. I remember your eyes. How do you do? She sits down on the ottoman, gracefully in the place just left vacant by Higgins. Mrs. Ainsworth Hill introducing my daughter Clara. How do you do? Did I not tell you that somebody is already doing what Eliza would have been doing had she come? Adidu, adidu, adidu. And she is very carefully pronouncing each word. How do you do? Clara impulsively. Clara?
Ma'am Clara?
Ji haan.
How do you do?
No, you are Miss Ainsford Hill. She's
Okay,
Clara,
Clara.
right?
How do you do? She
Yeah.
sits down on the ottoman
No, she
beside
says
Eliza.
this impulsively. After she's been asked, how do you do? Very politely. She is very impulsive. How do you do? She sits
Okay.
down on the
How do
ottoman.
you do?
She sits down on the ottoman beside Eliza, devouring her with her eyes. Acho se kawan. Freddie coming to their side of the ottoman. I have certainly had the pleasure, Mrs. Inesford Hill introducing my son Freddie. So again, they all think that she belongs to the aristocracy and that we must be in good terms with her because she will someday help in some advancement, if she may. Um, how do you do? Freddie bows and sits down in an Elizabethan chair, infatuated, already in love with Eliza. Higgins suddenly, by George, yes, it all comes back to me. They stare at him. Covent Garden, lamentedly, what a damned thing. Mrs. Higgins.
Henry, please. Henry, please. He's about to sit on the edge of the table. Don't sit on my writing table. You will break it.
Higgins sulkily, sorry. He goes to the divan, stumbling into the fender and over the fire irons on his way, extricating himself with muttered imprecations and finishing his disastrous journey by throwing himself so impatiently on the divan that he almost breaks it. Mrs. Higgins looks at him but controls herself and says nothing. क्या हुआ यहाँ पे?
दबाया अपना गुस्सा.
नहीं हुआ क्या पूरा पहले वर्ड से ही गोज टू द दीवान से लास्ट वर्ड तक एंड सेज नथिंग तक क्या हुआ
मतलब वो नॉर्मली नहीं किया, मतलब ही स्टम्बल्ड एंड फिर उसने अपने आप को ऑलमोस्ट लटाया दीवान से.
उसका
तो
कहीं
मतलब
पैर फंस गया
तरीके में
कहीं
नहीं.
गिर गया कहीं उधर कहीं
हाँ
इधर और रीजन इसका यही है कि उसको समझ आ गया ये सब एक दूसरे को ऑलरेडी मिल चुके हैं इसलिए सबको लग रहा है मैं तुम्हें जानता हूँ मैं तुम्हें जानती हूँ कोवेंट गार्डन दैट डैम्ड थिंग सब तो मिल चुके हैं सचमुच तो इस बात पे उसके दिमाग में वो चल रहा है और वो गिर रहा है उधर
तुरंत
इधर
उसके
हो
बाद
रहा है
मन में
एंड
आएगा कि असल
he's
में क्या
not
हो गया है.
carrying himself the way Mrs. Higgins would want him to carry himself, and he falls on the divan finally. A long and painful pause ensues. Painful cue? Half of the audience doesn't know what is happening. Mrs. Higgins is irritated by the behavior, and Higgins is overwhelmed by the idea that everybody already knows everyone. And this is a blunder. Mrs. Higgins, at last, after the pause, conversationally. Will it rain? Do you think? Is she doing it on purpose, asking about the rains?
Maybe.
Because she has already
और
been told that Eliza can
told
only
कि
talk
she'll
about
talk about
weather.
weather and health.
Eliza, the shallow depression in the west of these islands is likely to move slowly in an easterly direction. There are no indications of any great change in the barometrical situation. Freddie, how awfully funny! What is wrong with you, young man? I bet I got it right. Freddie, killing Mrs. Irons for help. I'm sure I hope it won't turn cold. There is so much influenza about. It runs right through our whole family regularly every spring. Eliza darkly. My aunt died of influenza, so they said. Mrs. Ainsworth Hill clicks her tongue sympathetically. Eliza in the same tragic tone. But it's my belief they done the old woman in. Done the old woman in again. This wasn't something you were prepared for. Mrs. Higgins is puzzled. Done her in? Eliza